welcome everybody to episode 119 of the Martini. I'm your host, Gus, and I've been Director of Business Development at Area Rental for the last 17 years, and honored to have you with us today. As a friendly reminder, please send us your questions via the Q&A tab here on Zoom, and we'll get to as many of those as possible during the course of the show. We are very fortunate to have with us today a filmmaker who needs no introduction, the iconic Ed Lachman. Ed is a legendary New York-based cinematographer who has been making movie magic for over 50 years. He has lensed projects for directors Steven Soderbergh, Werner Herzog, Wim Wenders, Ulrich Seidel, and has collaborated with Todd Haynes on the features Far From Heaven, the HBO series Mildred Pierce, Carol, Wonderstruck, and Dark Waters, just to name a few. Welcome, Ed, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. It's great to finally get to see you.
Yeah, finally we get to see each other. I've been watching periodically, and I was a little nervous to come on. I mean, I've been humbled and impressed by the young cinematographers. And in fact, Joe Anderson said it's a voice for the youth and the younger cinema. And I think that was a good thing. You know, you don't need to hear from, I used to be the youngest guy on the set. Now I'm becoming the oldest guy on the set. So I learned from all of you, and people like Zach Cooperstein and everybody they're so articulate, and it's such an inspiration to see their insights to their own work and others' work. So thank you.
Oh, I mean, that's what, for me, that's one of the most important things about our industry is how sharing it is. And, mentorship is a big thing. And I hear a lot of people talk about who mentored them and, who inspired them. And your work, your body of work always comes up. And I think that's wonderful to have you come on and join us today and talk about that. So thank you.
Yeah, well, our profession, we don't really get to see or be with other cinematographers, except for now situations like this or at festivals or panels. But it was interesting for me, like probably the best film school I ever had was I got to work with cinematographers in the 70s. And yeah, it was the early 70s that were the most influential for me and probably was my greatest film school. I had met Wim Wenders when he brought his film Alice in the Cities to the Museum of Modern Art. And I was so taken by Robbie Muller. And I ended up working with Robbie Muller on American Friend, Amerikanische Freund, and then went on and worked with Wim on Lightning Over Water and Tokyo Ga. And then from there, at that time, Sven Nykvist wasn't in the union, and we just lost Dick DeBona from General Camera, and he introduced me to Sven, and I became Sven's standby DP, which to me was like the greatest. We would talk about Sven Nykvist's work with Ingmar Bergman to the point of Louis Malle saying, "Can you stop talking about Bergman and do our shot?" But Sven had the most incredible memory. He could remember, I would say, the last shot of Passion of Anna, and he would tell me everything about it. He was so open and giving, and I went on to be his operator. And when there was a difficult shot, I would say, "Sven, do you want to do this shot?" And he goes, "Yeah." And wow, he could execute the shot. And, and he was happy because he wanted to operate, and, because of the union situation, he wasn't allowed to operate. And then I did my thesis on Before the Revolution of Bertolucci, and when he came to New York to shoot La Luna, I worked on La Luna with Storaro, and actually I met Bertolucci at the New York Film Festival when I was doing my thesis, And he brought The Conformist and The Spider Stratagem to the New York Film Festival. And he invited me to sit in his box. And after he asked me what I thought, I almost fell out of the box. So that was the best film school. So I encourage anybody young to seek out the people that you most admire or respect. And, you know, if they see something in you, they'll give you help, you know.
Yeah.
People always ask me, how do I learn from somebody,
Yeah. And you've had some really great cameramen work with you and are now going out and shooting.
Yeah, I mean, like
Cool
Matty
stuff.
Labatique was like a camera PA for me, and now he gets bigger Hollywood films than I ever would get, and I'm still good friends. And Stefan Shopsky was a NABIT gaffer when I was working around the Union, and we worked together. In fact, we worked on Lightning Over Water together. He went on to be a wonderful cameraman, and who else? Richard Rakowski, who does wonderful television. He was my assistant for a while. Mitch Dubin was my assistant for years as Janusz Kaminski's operator and Spielberg's operator. And recently I've been working with someone, Tinks Chan, who just won the emerging award for cinematography at the ASC, and he's a wonderfully talented young cinematographer. So it's great for me because I actually learn through younger people because I don't understand the most, recent technology. I could barely get on this today, but so that keeps me, young to be around younger cinematographers and see what their interest is. And so it goes both ways.
Yeah. And you've most recently, you've been combining formats. I think that's really kind of been fun too, is we've been working on projects together that have shot both film and digital. And then you guys just did your first digital project, you and Todd as well. How was that transition for you?
Well, it was a big transition for Todd, and for me to work with Todd that way. We had done, I had worked with Altman in digital. In fact, the earliest thing I did in video was Prairie Home Companion. We used, I guess, Sony 900s. I don't know why, but I still like the look of those cameras. But we wanted to shoot in film because Dark Waters is about contamination, how we're polluted by chemicals, so it was a natural for us to want to shoot in film because of the chemical process. And I just like the depth of the color and the separation, which I could go on and on about. So we did everything to kind of like screw up the look of digital. Now today, what I think of it this way, like our sensor is different film stocks. There's a difference maybe slight difference between a Sony sensor to an Arri sensor to a Panasonic sensor. So that's one aspect. And then why are we using 100-year-old lenses? I just had rehoused a set of Baltars, not super Baltars, Baltar lenses. And I have a set of Cook Speed Pancros, and I have a K35s. It's kind of the only way we get a different look is like playing with different glass. So I really went at it, and I went low res on it, 2.8, not 4K. And I found also shooting higher ASA instead of 800, 1280, 1600, you lost the low end of the curve, which to me made it feel more like film because you didn't have as much latitude. And then I played with color temperature, which I always did on film stock. What I tried to do was mimic things that I did in film and try to understand how I could manipulate digitally that. And so I think through exposure, color temperature, glass, we tried to come as close as we could. And we did in the end use some grain, live grain that I've had pretty good success with.
Hmm.
But look, the digital world's a digital world. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different tool. And I don't think we, as cinematographers, we should only have one tool to create our images. Thank God there's still film around, not every film, but I find it more and more now the studios are so afraid of film. I mean, they said things to us like, oh, if you get a scratch, you're not going to see it for enough, because we were in Cincinnati, you're not going to see it for 2 days. And then they had a really insidious argument. They said, chemical, you're polluting the environment shooting on film. So that was kind of a hard one to get around, but Kodak doesn't pollute the environment anymore. They're ecologically friendly now. But anyway, they were just afraid because they were inexperienced with shooting on film and whatever. I even did one other thing that's interesting maybe for some cinematographers. I did it in commercials years ago. I went into negative. We outputted the digital file in certain scenes. I couldn't do all of it because of money, but in time, I outputted some into a negative and then transferred back from the negative into the DI. And that had a nice effect.
Hmm. And speaking of lenses, you know, do you have go-to lenses, or do you choose lenses based on particular projects?
I like to try to, what I used to do in film even is like in Mississippi Masala, like in the Uganda, I shot with Cook Speed Pancrose and actually shot Fujifilm. And then in the South, in Mississippi, I shot with high-speed lenses and Kodak. So I used to like to try to mix up the texture and the look of the color through different film stocks and different lenses. So I play with different lenses for different, like in Wonderstruck, there's the black and white negative, which we didn't opt to do digitally because we had shot I'm Not There black and white, and Todd wanted to really shoot on negative. And I go, well, you know, it's really going to make a difference, but it really does make a difference in the sense of the exposure latitude and the grain structure. It will never be the same digitally as what XX negative or plus X is. Unfortunately, they don't make plus X anymore, but I guess because of the silver content. But anyway, so using older lenses like the Cook Speed Pancrose could have been the lenses that were used back in the 20s, because that part of the story takes place in the 20s. And it's always important for Todd to use the means, the technical means of that period to create the images, which, you know, sometimes it's like, wow, you know, like using a Western dolly in the streets of New York for the 70s part of that film to create the feeling of the French Connection and these long dolly shots, which the dolly grip and the grips were like ready to kill me because, you know, to reset that each time and make the move was much more complicated than laying track. So, but again, it created a look that I couldn't mimic. So that's another important reason. So why he likes the means, the method fits the means or whatever. So I used older zoom lenses, you know, my old 20-100 Cook and old Ingenue zooms for the 70s part. And I try to use film stock that was had more of a grain thing to it. And then I did something with, I found out in the 70s, they were making a lot of films on you know, large print orders. They would shoot it on Kodak, but they were printing on Fuji stock. And when you look at those prints, the highlights go magenta and the shadows go green. So I implemented that in the look with gels in the shooting to make it feel like what the prints would look like back in the 70s. And that gave another feel.
That's really cool. So, you know, you've like you've been talking about, you've done all these different projects that have been in time periods going back a century now. And it's really interesting to hear the concept behind that. I mean, most of those projects were with Todd, and I think that's really cool that you guys are investigating all these different time periods in the stories that you tell.
Yeah, I think what's interesting what Todd does is, and I think we're going to show you later, is he does these lookbooks. But the lookbooks don't just reference movies, cinematic language, but he looks at the history, the demographics, the social strata, the fashion of the time, and all these things to understand a certain time period give the emotional content of the psychology of the period. And what I find is that helps me understand visually how to portray, like in like Carol, let's say, we looked at still photographers that were using Ektachrome film, because Carol, it was a 50s film, but it wasn't the same time period. It was early 50s, just after the war. So there was kind of an austere look to it. Oh, well, here's the lookbook. And he takes sources from, like I say, photographers, historical, some images from different films, but it gives you a kind of an emotional context for the story. That's from Brief Encounter on the left. And so what I was saying is, what we found that was interesting was, like you can see here, the colors are muted because they were using the color film back then didn't have the color spectrum, the range that obviously color film does now. So I looked at like, there were early women photographers, Helen Levitt, Esther Bubley, Ruth Orkin, that were photographing reportage images in the streets, experimenting with film. And so that was one of the reasons we went with Super 16, because again, we wanted to capture the feeling of, let's say, someone opened up a photo album. That's a Degas in the middle. You know, we looked at painters from that period. And then that again, that informs kind of a psychology, because basically what I think images are about are visual metaphors for telling the story. And I like to think of it this way, you know, in a book, in literature, you can enter the interior world of the character, but it's much harder. You can show, it's much harder to show place, where you are, location. In cinema, it's just the opposite. You can show location, place, but it's much harder to enter the interior world of the characters. So that's what I'm always working with the director, is how you find the visual analogy to the psychology that you're creating for the world and the characters.
Yeah, beautiful.
And style, look, I'll say it this way. I always feel content informs the style, or the look of the film. But the style also influences the way you say something, influences what the content is. So it's a marriage between the two. And so that's why, you know, why is the camera static here and always moving there? And all those things have some internal logic, you know.
Right.
Like in Carol, it was about observation. You know, it was about something hidden. You know, there was, and we as the viewer are viewing them through doorways and windows and weather and night and partially seen. And it was almost like what they were going through emotionally as in their characters in a world that they were hidden from, or, you know, they were hiding from, you know. So it found its visual metaphor. I guess that's what we're always looking for, is we're looking for a visual metaphor to tell the story that enhances how you feel about the character.
Yeah. Very nice. Well, I'm looking forward to digging into that with you. I want to just take a moment and step back for a second, if that's okay, and talk about kind of your first big break and your first feature film, and then kind of work our way through what you've been doing recently.
Well, my first break, I guess my first break was Desperately Seeking Susan. You know, I met Susan at Telluride, and I didn't understand the script. It was just kind of the screwball comedy. And I had just gotten out of art school, basically. And even the way I got into film, I was studying painting and art history. And I took this course and I go, oh my God, those images just don't get up there on the screen. There's a reason why they get there. And there was this brilliant, he was a writer and Gideon Bachman. He was a scholar of Italian neorealism and Fellini. He was good friends with Fellini. And this film was Umberto D was constructed by De Sica, constructed totally with images. There was hardly any words. It's kind of mirrors today. It's like this old age pensioner who loses his boarding house and room, and then he loses his dog, and it's just this sad statement of the society he's living in post-war Italy. But it's all done through images, and I thought, wow, I was interested in German expressionism visually, and the psychology of how they painted those images. But I thought, wow, you could construct stories through images, and I don't have to be in a empty room with a blank canvas and spend years learning technique and then finding your own theme or your own story to tell in painting. That I could pick up a camera and capture what was around me and tell a story. So that's how I got interested in cinematography. And I always made my own little films. So when I would think about little films or that I was making, I always think about a painter. So in a way, what I did was with Desperately Seeking Susan, because I really didn't understand this screwball comedy, and I kind of thought I'd sold out by doing it, was that I would create Madonna's world like a German expressionistic painting that's very foreboding, nightmarish world. And then the Roseanne Arquette character in Suburbia would be kind of this pastel world that was, the color was kind of drained out of. And anyway, so that's how I kind of constructed that visually. And then I went off to Colombia and made a film in Colombia, Popayán, about Carlos Gardel, a play. I don't know, I think you're showing something here, or?
Well, attempting to. It's okay though. All good. And then I'd like to talk about the first film you and Todd did together, which was Far From Heaven, correct?
Yeah. Well, that was mirroring the world of Douglas Sirk and Russell Meddy and his what melodrama was. And he was using that world as a social commentary about the idea that the beauty of this world is never really obtained by the characters in their own personal world, that they'd always have to give up. They're people that don't have a great ability to move beyond the picture perfect world that they're part of, that they're not able to act on their own personal needs, that there's some greater consciousness of the society that overstems their own personal needs. And Cirque used the basically the middle class housewife entrapped by the very environment that they live in. See here, like she's being photographed by the newspaper because her husband is up and coming in the company in her picture perfect world. But he was doing it as a social statement. He came from Germany. He was like one of the last emigres from Germany. And he got a chance to be like a doctor, script doctor. And these melodramas were like soap operas, you know, and they were shot like in 18 days. They weren't taken very seriously. They were just popular culture at the time. Yeah, that's a good image to talk about something. So when I approached this, I realized, looking at the way they shot these films, because they shot them in 18 days, that one, they would use a moving master, and then they would just pop in on a tighter lens. They wouldn't move off axis of the dolly. So that created a certain language for those films. Then the lighting was unmotivated. So I did everything. We were on real locations, but I tried to make it look like a studio. So here I'm this actually was this was actually really in a studio. So the light's coming from the windows, but then I have this like Cucaloras coming in from the other side that still bothers me, that I would never write like that. But I knew that's the way they would have done something, you know, to create this, you know, expressionistic mannered artifice world. And what Todd was testing was, could he still tell stories about racism, gender, homosexuality in a contemporary time period in language that people would feel they're superior to? It was, and emotionally people get connected to the story. And they've done studies why melodramas work for people. And it's like, we almost know that we're manipulated by, you know, realism. And this allows people to enter their own emotions because they're allowed to participate in the abstraction of the world. So this is like when she comes to the dance class and she sees that the other mothers are looking at her because, you know, she's befriended the black gardener, and anyway, so this is just another, you know, playing with color. I always see, from my painting background, I always play with a two color, a receding and an advancing color. So the warm, the magenta against the blue, and the warm lights. And so, you know, more like constructing an image in a painting.
And was this was completely photochemical at the time, correct?
Yeah. In fact, there were DIs at this time, but we chose not to do a DI because he wanted the imperfection of even the dissolves and the fades and the problems that they would have had photochemically, because again, that would make it feel more like that time period. And so this was a real bar in Jersey that I went in and, you know, tried to manipulate. And there, the magenta against the green, those are the, you know, contrasting colors. So you know, your eye, when you work with one color, your eye loses that color. So that's why I've always understood from like pop art, and is that when you work with contrasting, you see the colors better.
Yeah.
And if you use too many colors, it kind of gets muddy. you know, so.
Very cool. And then one film that we constantly are referencing and talking about with other filmmakers is Carol. I mean, and you know, the images speak for themselves, but the work you did there was absolutely amazing. And I think also what's really interesting is you guys chose to shoot 16 millimeter format to create a 35 millimeter format look, right?
Well, the idea there was we had shot Mildred Pierce in Super 16. Again, it was like during the Depression, and we didn't want the film noir look or the melodrama look of the black and white, you know, where they always have a murder in the film. So it was more a character study of the characters, this is Carol. And so when we came to Carol, it was an austere period. It was just after, it was a Patricia Highsmith book. It was just after the war. And, you know, even though we weren't bombed, but we were rebuilding our cities and so there was a grayness to things. And it wasn't the mid 50s to late 50s of Far From Heaven, which was the optimism. Stay on this one for a bit. So it wasn't the optimism of materialism and consumerism, but this was and this story that Patricia Highsmith wrote, she is the only real personal story, because she really said that the crime here, Todd said, the crime here was their love, these two women's love for each other, was that by shooting Super 16 again, we were trying to reference the way that world could look through photographs, if you picked up a photograph from that time period. And so this was just shooting through like this incredibly dirty kind of scratch plexiglass window in this restaurant, or, you know, it was a coffee shop in Cincinnati. And the great thing about Cincinnati is it's almost caught, part of it's caught like you're still in the 50s there. You know, you look out the window and it still looks like the 50s. So the Super 16 again gave us a quality, a texture. And later, you know, you do these things, you don't really know if they're going to totally work or not, but almost the texture of the grain gives you a certain feeling of what's hidden behind their emotions for me. You know, that it isn't picture perfect, it's more impressionistic. So, you know, now here's an interesting, when we talk to you didn't say what we're going to do later, but we're going to talk about color correction later, whatever. You know, when you work with a director, everybody sees exposure different in color. I had more detail in the shadow area of her face, but in the post, in the color correct, he really wanted to block that up. I was a little afraid of that, but anyway, but I worked very hard to like have detail in shadow areas, and then get in post and I want to do something different. So anyway, this we also use another reference to a photographer, Saul Leiter, who was a street photographer like Robert Frank, who was another great impression for me. And what he did is he was interested in the abstract expressionists, the painters in New York in that time in the 50s. And so his images are always shot through reflections and glass and texture, again, to create kind of some kind of like abstract art, an emotion from the viewer rather than a specific social realistic story, you know, content, that it would leave an impression or a feeling. And so we kind of found Saul Leiter. We actually found Saul Leiter in Mildred Pierce because we couldn't, you know, we shot Mildred Pierce in New York and it was supposed to be Pasadena. And we thought by shooting through reflections, it would give depth to the image and not see the whole world outside of it. And anyway, so a lot of it's shot through doorways and reflections. This was interesting. It was a very small tunnel in Cincinnati. We're trying to make look like the Holland Tunnel. So we drove through this tunnel over and over again, and I had lights rigged around the car on a camera car with fluorescent bulbs and tungsten bulbs to kind of screw up the color rendition in the tunnel. So
beautiful. And I think, yes, we have a surprise. And as we go into the next two projects, maybe this is a great time and opportunity to bring in your collaborator, Joe Gawler, to talk about working on Wonderstruck and then Dark Waters, and how you guys collaborated on that. This will be fun.
Great.
Good.
Hey.
Hey, Joe, welcome.
Start my video. Give me a moment. Here we go.
You are?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
We even see you.
Hey, Ed. Good to see you, man.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you making the time to join us. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm actually stepping out of a session, so.
Oh, wow. Well, I appreciate that.
We'll get back to it soon.
Interesting how he's remotely doing sessions. He should talk to you. You heard enough about me, and then we can talk.
Oh, I know this is going so well. I was really enjoying just watching some of this. But it's interesting. Ed and I first started collaborating through some Criterion Collection titles. So it's just cool. Like we actually worked on these Douglas Sirk films because of Ed's expertise, and then shooting Far From Heaven. He was kind of like consulting with Criterion, and so that's how he and I met, was working on like All That Heaven Allows and Written on the Wind. So that was a really great like introduction, and it's so cool to see these images and such now and see that influence certainly in Far From Heaven. And then also with Todd, I first worked with Todd remastering Safe for the Criterion Collection, and so the three of us were then able to kind of come together, and we've been kind of collaborating ever since. So it's been really, really, really cool to have that experience with two people that I admire so much.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, it was Ed's idea. He wanted to bring you on and really talk about the collaboration between you two on these last two projects that they've worked on. So let's start with Wonderstruck, because this is such an interesting project to take on because of all the different time periods and the approach with black and white, with color, mixing formats again. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a interesting challenge. I think mixing the digital with the film, ultimately in the end, I think I would agree, like it became seamless, right? Like, there were just certain limitations with what they were able to do on set, lighting wise in certain locations that they had to shoot digital. And
the Museum of Natural History, because
yeah, right. So you're just really handcuffed.
Freaked out about us having a lot of equipment, and we could never go into the dioramas. That's actually built on a set to match the museum, and that's in the 20s. But they were so freaked out, like it took us 2 months to negotiate 4 kino flows in one of those dioramas because they're hermetically sealed.
Right.
So I had to balance off of that. And then we were also limited. We could only go in at night to shoot because obviously they have people in the museum during the day, as spectators. And so the reason we came to digital there is because I could bring in fewer units, smaller camera setups. And so we married that. But the rest of the film was shot in XX negative and color film.
I have to say, like in my experience in projects that have shot both film and digital, the digital ultimately looks better because you've had that film reference, if that makes sense. So I like to grade the film elements first because there is just inherently something extra in that negative that you can find it in the digital negative. You need to go and make it happen. Whereas with the film, it just seems to kind of, there's always some kind of vibe or energy that already exists in the negative. So if you have that reference, like we did in Wonderstruck, where we had film, then it made the digital grading experience like that much easier. And then with the black and white specifically, what really helped, it was somewhat new at the time, but the live grain, Ed, speaking with the guys at Live Grain, just like we specifically got that XX film stock, and just the way that integrates into the different tonal ranges with different grain really like sells the whole experience, that you're not kind of bumping from digital to film throughout the movie. Wouldn't you say, Ed?
No, I think that's true, and what I like to say, which you also have to be a great psychiatrist, because you have two minds, and directors always want to try different things at different times. And when you get to that point, in post, when you're doing the color correction, it's disconcerting for a cinematographer. And that's the one thing I wanted to say. It's so important for me, and I know for others, is to get your dailies as close to what you think it should be, because the director and the editor get married to what the look is in the editing room. And if you get there and they say, but that's the way it looked in the editing room, that's what I like, they get married to that look, and it's hard to get them away from that. And sometimes on the Avid, they recolor correct things, and then you're totally screwed, So I spend a lot of time at night calling the colorists to tell them, I'll do it this way or that way, or send them a frame grab, or go in and they let me time footage. So even if you do change it, at least you're starting at a place where you think you should be close to it. So, like I was saying, the look here in the 70s is kind of this yellow green feeling, that, the way print stocks could have looked back then. And so anyway, Joe is great at navigating different sensibilities, because he's got to be in a position to make both of us happy, the director and the cinematographer. And the other thing I realized, which I'm sure other people realize, not everybody sees color or density the same way. And so that's a hard thing to articulate. Maybe you could talk about that, how you navigate that.
I think it's important to have collaborators that you feel comfortable with. Like, I can only imagine as a cinematographer, like working with a new colorist for the first time, you must be really nervous about that, because you, like you said, you don't know if you guys will see things the same way. So at this point in my career, I've got very fortunate just to have like a collection of filmmakers that that I have a shorthand with, and we're getting there with you and Todd as well. Like, you work enough, like, I already have a sense of your sensibilities and taste. So that makes it so much easier, that we've been through this together a number of times. But I think as a colorist, it is like it's psychological. Being a psychiatrist is a huge part of the equation. And, I'll generally defer to the cinematographer. They're usually the one that's sitting next to me. So the communication may go between, director to cinematographer to me, and then Ed sitting next to me, like elbowing me or kicking me under the table if I move something the wrong way, but which is funny. But and another thing that's important in the grade is developing a language, so you don't want to get too clever with all the tools in the beginning, because you may ultimately be undoing all of that work because you still are kind of finding the language and in the look through the grade. So we we talk about, you know, clicks of exposure or clicks of color. So Ed and Todd, you know when I put a click of yellow or 2 clicks of yellow or 5 clicks of yellow, like, or, you know, 5% saturation, like I call all of that out throughout the session, or say, hey, this is, you know, 5% more contrast, this is 10% more contrast, so that, you know, by the second day, they're starting to call out these corrections. You know, you've got all of these knobs and buttons and tools in front of you, and if you're just kind of moving stuff around and they see it change, they're not as much of a participant, you know, whereas I start telling them what we're doing and using these kind of that language of like, hey, this is increasing it by this much, then, like I said, by the second or third day, they're really saying, hey, can we see 5% more contrast? Or, you know, Ed's always saying, you know, give me 3 clicks more yellow, or can we have another click of green? And then that just really puts everyone on the same page. And it's cool because working with them, you're going to have a naturalistic look. Like my projects, I always want to have, you know, have it feel photochemical. I'm not trying to like fool anybody that it was shot on film or digital, but I just, working on all of these Criterion movies, that always kind of resets your eyes and your palette. That's kind of my tendency to work towards that. And then to get to that naturalistic look can either be very simple or it can actually be complex in the tools you're using, but you have to just be really careful, you know, not to overdo it, to show your hand so that it feels manipulated, you know. But with Ed and Todd, there's always going to be an impressionistic element, you know, but it still feels natural. It usually has to do with, you know, pushing some type of a tonality into the balance, which, you know, Ed is a big fan of.
Yeah. And then moving over to Dark Waters, which was all digital and has a very different, unique look. It feels like the look was kind of going for more of that 70s kind of paranoia thriller type stuff, the stuff you would see from, you know, Gordon Willis and things like that. And I thought that was really interesting. Dude, what did you guys do together to get to that look?
Ed, do you want to start?
Well, we definitely were influenced by what Willis was doing with Alan Pakula in his whistleblower films, like All the President's Men and Clute, and so that was a starting point. And then another reference was Milos Ondrejek in what was the film? Oh, Silkwood. So as much as I use primes, I got 2 great operators, and we use, you know, can change the framing and get a lot of coverage that way in those situations. So anyway, I played a lot with, like I said, the color temperature. You know, like in the exterior scenes, I would rate it, let's say 32 Kelvin, and get more of a cool effect, because it was about the emotions of, but it was also the climate and the environment that, you know, reinforced what the emotions were in the struggle for these characters. So the color, the part of the problem was we were shooting the film in winter, and it was supposed to take place over 15 years in different climate, in different time as seasons. And thank God when we got to the timing, the color correcting, we kind of all agreed that we could keep the color palette and that would unify, because I never really could make it look like summer other than the first scene we went back and shot in the summer, the kids going in the pond. But the rest of it I had to kind of cheat. So you know, that operator, he did Birdman. He's a great Steadicam operator. But we were going to use a lot of Steadicam, then we didn't. You know, so we did use it in very specific areas.
Did you approach the lighting very top heavy, Ed, in this?
Very naturalistic, but controlled. You know, I like, if I'm in fluorescent situations, you know, why not use fluorescent situations? But I would block areas. You know, I think we're going to come up to I mean, this was really interesting. We got this house to allow us to build a fire in the front of the house with a false front. And you really use fire to illuminate that. On the left side, that I did use a light, but there's a fire engine. So I used, you know, the whirling light there. So but that's really all the smoke from the fire. But I think we're coming up to where I lit like locations, you know, not this, but the offices were in the real offices of where the law firm was. And the other thing was, I tried to contaminate the images, even though we didn't shoot on film. I felt that the images should feel contaminated. And so, you know, I used mixed lighting that way. See, the thing I find with digital versus film, in film grain, you get I call it a kind of a contamination between warm and cool colors, opposite colors, mixed in the grain structure because of the 3 layers, where in digital, you get one or the other. I find it's harder to mix the colors, but that's something I work with Joe to try to implement that later in the post to try to mix the colors more. We're still not coming up to the image I wanted to.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time kind of developing the show, like the lookup table, which is kind of our digital film stock. And yeah, it was nice to kind of celebrate the imperfections, right? The dirtiness. Ed kept saying, using the term, you know, contaminated. So, you know, it's dirty and gritty. And we also added a lot of grain to this, like quite a bit of grain, just to really break it up and make it just feel, you know, as
and I never
dirty as possible.
Like highlights burning out, you know, because in naturalism, that's the way things do happen, you know, where you can't control the highlights. I don't mind implementing the highlights burning out, because that's the way it would be in normal life. So this was actually built on another floor of the law firm where we could build a set. And, but then I just controlled the light, the fluorescence overhead. Well, actually a box. I made a light box overhead, but with fluorescence. So it matched the hallways to where they really were fluorescents. But we still need to come up with the next one. Well, here was an interesting case.
Oh, that's nice.
This was supposed to be spring. It was winter out there. It was rainy. And I said to Joe, hey, why don't you just throw green in the shadow detail? And there's just green out there that you could feel like, well, maybe the spring is coming, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Said, I don't know. And then he did it. You know? And I was, oh, that's not too bad. Anyway, so that was the way we fooled that one. You know, we just threw a lot of green in the shadow areas. Remember that?
Yeah, I was going to say too, what's interesting, you know, Todd is, you know, coming in and out of the sound mix, right? So it's, you know, he's mixing with us, and then he comes up, you know, in the afternoon and looks at images with Ed and I, and, you know, with this whole kind of pandemic situation now, like I know Ed was touching on it earlier, you know, the next thing that we're going to be working on together, you know, we're still in this strange situation with, you know, quarantines and things like that. So it's a different time, and we've kind of discovered a lot of new interesting ways of working. And Ed and I will be doing that on this next project. But it's been really cool and enlightening to be able to do stuff remotely, and as long as, like, you know, make sure that the clients are provided with like a color accurate display. And then I know that we're looking at the same thing while we work remotely. And then it's amazing that we'll be able to push the look of the film from, you know, dailies up to 95% finished before we even have to be in a room together necessarily. And it's been really successful. But to build on top of that, what's really cool is now like I'm posting the work every night for the filmmakers to see. So like, for example, with Todd kind of popping in and out of the room between the mix, and he's so busy with like a million other things, you know, it would always be that once he's in the DI theater, that's the time when he has to look at the color, and then he's got a million things going on. It's like now, you know, Ed and I could, you know, have a couple days of advancing the look, and then, you know, Todd can be involved with that, but then he can also have that work to look at over the weekend, you know, on the display that we provide for him, and he and Ed, you know, while they're having a cup of coffee and you know, at their home, can be making notes. And I just think it's going to be, I'm excited to do that with them. I've been doing it successfully on other projects now, and it really like ultimately makes a better looking film in the end, because not so many things, you know, fall through the cracks.
Yeah,
it's exciting. So like out of all of this, like we're exploring and discovering really amazing new ways of working. And I'm sure it's the same thing on the front end with physical production.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, it's what's really cool about our industry. A lot of people have spoken up about that, is that we, as a whole, all of us filmmakers, we adapt very quickly. We have to. It's just, you know, what we have to do, and whether we're on set or responding to the client's needs for, you know, technology or a change, because the artist is constantly creating and wanting something new, or trying something different, or having a new thought or a new idea and saying, oh, we're going to go this way. So we have to adapt. And our industry is doing that right now as you speak. And it's pretty cool to see everybody jump on it and just find a way to work.
It's cool. It's a lot of things that we've always wanted to do. Like I've always wanted to have the ability to do some of my work from my house, but we never quite, there was never enough push to make it happen from a technology standpoint. And all of a sudden here we were in the situation where it was this necessity, and the team at Harbor like really like invested and pushed forward. And now it's pretty amazing. So I can see like a hybrid going forward of, and certainly it's going to make things easier if a cinematographer is, you know, on location, you know, getting them to come to the DI is difficult a lot of times. So now, you know, we have options where it's not just sending them some stills or like a quick time. It's like, it's much, much more refined now, and a really great experience that I'm kind of excited even as things go back to normal, that, you know, we'll be able to kind of keep some of this and ultimately make the whole like process even better.
Absolutely. Wow, that's great.
Up with us in your room.
Well, you know, look, it's great. Yeah, like, you know, for filmmakers that are in New York.
My problem is we're going to lose all the goodies, you know, all the
That's right. Look, Ed, you don't live too far away, so we'll be making an exception in Ed's case.
Well, maybe you could FedEx the carrot so we could eat something while we're.
That's right. Yeah. We'll send you some snacks.
Very good. Yeah. Well, John, that was awesome. And what I think that's a perfect note for us to end on for the day, is just to hear what's happening and where things are going. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. We'll have to do this again.
Where are you, Joe? Are you at the office and building? You don't live in New Jersey. That's not.
I'm actually in the studio today. Yeah, I had to check on some things. Yeah. So. No, that's not my house. Yeah.
All right. Great.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was great seeing you both.
Thank you so much, guys. All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that joined us today. Please join us again in a couple of weeks. We're going to sit down and speak with cinematographer James Laxton about his work. And all of our episodes are going to be available on our website, airyrental.com. And you can also check out all of our unique and exciting products there. And you can follow us on youtube.com/.
Questions.
And we have lots of questions, which I'm going to get over to you, Ed, so we can try.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Ed, I'll see you later. I got to get back to work.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.